Chapter 7 of Lotus Buds. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Alice Jane. Lotus Buds by Amy Wilson CARMICHAEL. 7. How the Children Come. They come in many ways through the help of many friends. We have told before how our first two babies came to us through two pastors, one in the north, the other in the south of our district. Since then, many Indian pastors and workers and several warm-hearted Christian apothecaries and nurses in government service have become interested, with the result that little children who must otherwise have perished have been saved. One little babe, who has since become one of our very dearest, was redeemed from temple life by the wife of a leading pastor, who was wonderfully brought to the very place where the little child was waiting for the arrival of the temple people. We have seldom known a more definite leading. I being in the way, the Lord led me, was surely true of that friend that day, and of other Indian sisters who helped her. Later, when she came to stay with us, she told us about it. When I first heard of this new work, I was not in sympathy with it. I even talked against it to others. But when I saw that little babe, so innocent and helpless, and so beautiful too, then all my heart went out to it. And now, tears filled her eyes. She could not finish her sentence. Nor was there any need. The loving Indian heart had been won. My mother was with us when this baby came, and she adopted her as her own from the first, and always had the little basket in which the baby slept put by her bedside. When the mosquitoes began to be troublesome, the basket was slipped under her own mosquito net, lest the little pink blossom should be disturbed. But the baby did not thrive at first, and the pink, instead of passing into buff, began to fade into something too near ivory for our peace of mind. It was then the friend who had saved the little one came to stay with us, and she proposed taking her and her nurse out to the country village, in hopes of getting a foster mother for her there. So my mother, the pastor's wife, the baby, and her nurse went out to the Good News village and stayed in the pastor's hospitable home. The hope which had drawn them there was not fulfilled, but the memory of that visit is fresh and fragrant. We read of alienation between Indian Christians and missionaries. We are told there cannot be much mutual affection and contact. We often wonder why it should be so, and are glad we know by experience so little of the difficulty that we cannot understand it. We have found India friendly, and her Christians are our friends. In these matters, each can only speak from personal experience. Ours has been happy. There may be unkindness and misunderstanding in India, as in England, but nowhere could there be warmer love, more tender affection. All sorts of people help us in this work of saving the children. Once it was a convert schoolboy who saw a widow with a baby in her arms. Noticing the bright, large eyes and what he described as the blossoming countenance of the child, he got into conversation with the mother, and learned that she had been greatly tempted by temple women in the town who had admired the baby and wanted to get it. "If I were to give her to them, she will never be a widow," was the allurement there. No bitterness of widowhood had entered into her soul and poisoned the very mother-love within her, and yet there was something of it left, for she did not want her babe to be a widow. The boy, with the leisureliness of the East, dropped the matter there, and only in a casual fashion, a week or so later, mentioned in a letter that he had seen this pretty child, and that, probably, the mother would end in yielding to the temptation to give her to the temple. "But it may be by the grace of God that you will be able to save her." We sent at once to try to find the mother, but she had wandered off, and no one knew her home. However, the boy was stirred to prayer, and we prayed here, and a search through towns and villages resulted at last in the mother being traced and the child being saved. Christian women have helped us. One such, sitting on her veranda after her morning's work, heard two women in the adjoining veranda discuss the case of a widow who had come from Travancore with a bright little baby girl, whom she had vowed she would give to one of our largest temples. The Christian woman had heard of Dohnavur nurseries, and at once she longed to save this little child, but hardly knew how to do it. She feared to tell the two women she had overheard their conversation, so, in the simplicity of her heart, she prayed that the widow might be detained and kept from offering her gift till our worker, old Devai, could come, and she wrote to old Devai. Happily, Devai was at home when the letter reached her. Otherwise days would have been lost, for her wanderings are many. She went at once and found the mother most reasonable. Her idea had been to acquire merit for herself and an assured future for her child by giving it to the gods. But when the matter was opened to her, she was willing to give it to us instead. In her case, as in the other, our natural instinct would have been to try to make some provision by which the mothers could keep their babies, but it would not have been possible. The cruel law of widowhood had begun to do its work in them. The temple people's inducements would have proved too much for them. The children would not have been safe. Once it was a manservant who saved a lonely child. He heard an aid in the market which put him on the track. The case was very usual. The parents were dead, and the grandmother was in difficulties. For the parents' sake, she wanted to keep the dear little babe, but she was old and had no relatives to whose care she could commit it. Mercifully, we were the first to hear about this little one, for even as a baby she was so winning that temple people would have done much to get her, and the old grandmother would almost certainly have been beguiled into giving her to them. How often it has been so! She will be brought up carefully according to her caste. All that is beautiful will be hers, jewels and silk raiment. The hook concealed within the shining bait is forgotten. The old grandmother feels she's doing her best for the child, and the little life passes out of her world. It is a dear little thing, and the man, its grandfather, seemed really fond of it. He said he would not part with it, but its parents are both dead, and he did not know what might happen to it if he died. This from the letter of a fellow missionary who saved the little one and sent her out to us is descriptive of many. Not the measure of a rapeseed of sleep does she give me. I have done my best for her since her mother died, but her noise is most vexatious. This was a father's account of the matter only a week or two ago. Have you no women relations? We asked him. Numerous are my women folk, but they are all cumbered with children. How can they help me? Given these circumstances of difficulty and the strong underpull of temple influence, is it wonderful that many an orphaned babe finds her way to the temple house? For in the South, the child of the kind we are seeking to save is never offered to us because there is no other place where she is wanted. Everywhere there are those who are searching for such children, and each little one saved represents a counter-search, and somewhere earnest prayer. The mystery of our work, as we have said before, is the oftentimes apparent victory of wrong over right. We are silent before it. God reigns. God knows. But sometimes the interpositions are such that our hearts are cheered, and we go on in fresh courage and hope. Among our earliest friends were some of the London Missionary Society workers of South Travancore. One of these friends interested her Bible women, and when, one morning, one of these Bible women passed a woman with a child in her arms on the road leading to a well-known temple, she was ready to understand the leading, and made friends with the mother. She found that even then she was on her way to a temple house. A few minutes later, and she would not have passed her on the road. There was something to account for this directness of leading. At that time we had our branch nursery at Nayur, in South Travancore, 10 miles from the place where the Bible woman met the mother. On that same morning, Panamai, who was in charge there, felt impelled to go to the upper room to pray for a little child in danger. She remained in prayer till the assurance of the answer was given, and then returned to her work. That evening, a bandy drove up to the nursery, and she saw the explanation of the pressure and the answer to the prayer. The little child was lifted out of the bandy and laid in her arms. She stood with her nurses about her, and together they worshipped God. This prayer pressure has been often our experience when special help is needed to effect the salvation of some little unknown child. It was our prayer day, July 6, 1907. 3 of us were burdened with a burden that could not be lightened till we met and prayed for a child in peril. We had no knowledge of any special child, though of course we knew of many in danger. When we prayed for the many, the impression came the more strongly that we were meant to concentrate upon one. Who or where we did not know. 5 days later, a letter reached us from a friend in the Wesleyan mission, working in a city 500 miles distant. The letter was written on the 8th. On the morning of the 6th, a woman who knows our Bible women well told them of a little Brahmin baby in great danger. So Jay and 2 others went at once and spent the greater part of the morning trying to save the child. It was in the house of a so-called temple woman who had adopted it, and she had taken every care of it. For some reason she wanted to go away and could not take it with her. 2 or 3 women of her own kind were there and wanted it. One had money in her hand for it, but Jay had already got the baby into her arms and reasoned and persuaded until the woman at last consented. They at once brought it here. Had the friendly woman not told Jay, the baby would now be in the hands of the second temple woman. I visited the woman afterwards. She had 2 grown girls in the room with her, the elder such a sweet girl. She told me openly it was all according to custom, and that God had arranged their lives on those lines, and they could not do otherwise. It is terribly sad, and such houses abound. Happenings of this sort, if the word happen is not irreverent in such a connection, have a curiously quieting effect upon us. We are very happy, but there is a feeling of awe which finds expression in words which, at first reading, may not sound appropriate, but we write for those who will understand. O fix thy chair of grace, that all my powers may also fix their reverence. Scatter, or bind, or bend them all to thee. Though elements change and heaven move, let not thy higher court remove, but keep a standing majesty in me. End of chapter 7.